Hi, I'm Brendia Miller, just a girl who feels like she barely survived from being 18 to 29, from an abusive marriage to divorce, pregnant with my sweet girl to the mom of an angel, and this was all before I was even 20. Since then, I married the high school sweetheart, had a sweet boy, wrote a few books, blogs, and in 9 years, 3 states, 4 cities, 13 homes, 2 hotels, 1 angel girl, 1 sweet boy, a bunch of jobs, and an insane amount of love and laughter. Here I am, 30 years old, talking to you, sharing my wisdom from the infinite lessons I have learned while still learning to navigate around the things that I haven't. Come along and navigate with me. There is room here for your joy, your grief, your hormones, your emotions, your friendships, relationships, heartbreak, and all of the other things that come along with being in your 30s. Hey 30-something gang, welcome back to the In Your 30s podcast where we dive into the conversations that matter to our generation. I'm Brendia Miller, your host, and today we're talking about something fascinating and possibly quite often misunderstood. And this is the concept of lavender marriages and relationships. We're going to break it down into 3 deep dives: the history behind these partnerships, how they've evolved over time, and the role they play in today's society. Whether you've heard of this term or this is your first time encountering it, I promise you'll walk away with a whole new perspective. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is a lavender marriage? The term has been around for decades, and while definitions may vary, it generally refers to a marriage between a man and a woman in which at least one of the partners is LGBTQ+. These marriages were often arranged to protect reputations in times where living openly gay was not an option. And when we take a look at history, especially Hollywood's golden age, there were so many examples of high-profile actors and public figures who entered into these marriages basically to just maintain their careers. People like Rock Hudson, Cary Grant, and even Eleanor Roosevelt were rumored to have been involved in these types of relationships or have these types of relationships despite the facts that they were married. Back then, being openly gay could mean losing your job, your family, and even your freedom. It was a sign of embarrassment, and it could really take you down a few notches when you're in high society. One of the most famous examples is Rock Hudson, a Hollywood heartthrob who was forced to maintain the image of a leading man despite being gay. He entered into a brief marriage with Phyllis Gates, who was his agent's secretary. And many people believe this was a publicity stunt or a PR move, as we would see it nowadays, to keep his sexuality hidden. Another rumored lavender marriage was that Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy were both in their own relationships outside of their marriage. While they were portrayed as Hollywood's golden couple, many biographers claim Tracy was in the closet and that Hepburn also had her own same-sex relationships. And even beyond Hollywood, political figures have been suspected of having similar arrangements. Now, we say suspected and allegedly because the point in these arrangements is so that people do not know or cannot confirm, and that is what generally would cost people so much. But there's been plenty of political figures and Hollywood figures who have been suspected of similar arrangements, such as J. Edgar Hoover, the longtime FBI director who was never married and was widely speculated to have a romantic relationship with his deputy, Clyde Tolson, while maintaining a socially acceptable image. Now, while all of these relationships are allegedly lavender marriages, that is the point. Again, to reiterate, the point in a lavender marriage is to dismiss the allegations and deter suspicions. And this wasn't just in Hollywood. It was in politics. It was in business. Anyone in high society could possibly have known about or partaken in lavender marriages. And it was just their way of conforming to societal norms while still maintaining their true identities in private. Laws criminalizing homosexuality, the threat of being institutionalized, and intense societal pressure made this matter for survival for many in life and in their careers. Another thing to keep in mind is how these marriages actually worked. Some couples were truly best friends, understanding the arrangement and providing mutual support. Others had unspoken rules like separate bedrooms or discrete relationships outside of their marriage. But in every case, these relationships highlight just how deeply ingrained societal expectations were at the time and can be today, even when running in like specific crowds or having specific careers. And even when we look at early history, pre 20th century, and we look at ancient civilizations and the hidden lives, we look at the fact that many of the societies, in basically all societies, LGBTQ plus individuals have existed. But in many societies, the societal norms have often forced them into secrecy. And in many cultures, homosexuality was either openly accepted or quietly tolerated. But as Christianity and other religions' influence spread, attitudes shifted and it made open same sex relationships more difficult. And throughout history, many LGBTQ plus individuals entered heterosexual marriages as a means of social survival. You would be socially outcast if people knew that you were openly homosexual in any way. And when we look at the Victorian era and the rise of respectability, the 19th century saw a strong push towards heterosexual marriage and making it a social norm. LGBTQ individuals in elite families often entered heterosexual marriages to protect their family names, their property, their social standings, their reputations, whatever needed to be protected or could be diminished by their sexuality. And even Oscar Wilde, one of the most famous literary figures of the era, was married to Constance Lloyd despite his well documented relationships with men. And it's even said that his eventual downfall in the late 1800s highlighted the risks associated with being openly gay at that time. It's a prime example to many why you kept it a secret and you entered these relationships and you entered these marriages, and this person was your best friend, but they were not the love of your life, you know? And these are just prime examples of why then it was important. And in the early 20th century, the concept of lavender marriage really gained traction, particularly in Hollywood. The entertainment industry was heavily policed by morality clauses, studio contracts, and societal expectations once again. Being openly LGBTQ could end a career, and so many stars entered strategic marriages to protect what they had spent their life building. Hollywood has always strived to control the image of people that thrive in the entertainment business. That's just always been the way of Hollywood. And the early film industry was controlled by major studios like MGM, Warner Bros., Paramount, and these studios crafted and controlled the public images of the people they made stars. And so naturally, there were ways that people had to move around this crafted protection of their image to still live their happy lives and live as themselves. LGBTQ actors were forced into heterosexual marriages to prevent scandal, to prevent outrage, to prevent, boycotts on studios. And studio contracts often included morality clauses. These publicists worked tirelessly to maintain an actor's image as a romantic lead or a family-oriented star. And oftentimes, I think it's also contributed to the way that we look at people now, because we have seen so many people growing up, especially if you're in your 30s, you've seen so many people growing up in Hollywood that have had to maintain an image, and they only take on certain roles and you only see certain context about them. And the reason is because these studios and these producers, they go extra miles to protect these images and portray these people as the characters that they portray themselves on screen. It helps with the believability of them being that character and having those morals and those values that the character has, even if it doesn't go directly hand in hand with their real life. And there are so many alleged examples of lavender marriages in Hollywood. They said Rock Hudson and Phyllis Gates was an example of lavender marriages, but also Cary Grant and Randolph Scott, multiple marriages. Grant and Scott lived together for years, but both were married to women at various points, fueling speculation that these marriages were arranged for public appearances. Judy Garland and Vincent Minnelli. Vincent Minnelli is a well-known director and was rumored to be bisexual, but his marriage to Garland really helped him maintain his public image in an era where Hollywood frowned upon non-heteronormative relationships. And honestly, it doesn't mean that these people did not love each other. Again, it takes a certain type of love to be married to one person and accept them as they are, when that's not the person that, they are portrayed to be as. And so these people, they still loved each other. It was just in a very different way than I would love my husband, or, you would love your spouse. And with McCarthyism and the fear of being outed, the 1940s and the 50s were marked by the Red Scare. This was basically a witch hunt against communists during the Cold War, and it actually fueled what some people seen as the Lavender Scare, which was a period of anti-LGBTQ repression in the United States during this era. It was a moral panic that really led to the mass dismissal of LGBTQ people from government services, because they were seen as some sort of threat due to their sexuality. That's how crazy we are in America. But they figured these people were more susceptible to blackmail and delivering the government secrets that we just hold so dearly. And so they let them go. They punished them for their sexuality due to the political scare and hysteria going on. Being outed as gay or lesbian was often linked to accusations of just being morally corrupt, and careers would be instantly destroyed when it was known to your peers and your friends that you were gay or you were a lesbian. However, these lavender marriages allowed individuals in Hollywood and politics, as well as many other public arenas, to shield themselves from these accusations, keep their jobs, and therefore keep their lives intact while still being able to be themselves. And later on in the 60s and the 80s, we do see a shift towards LGBTQ rights and the continued use of lavender marriages in different ways. But with the civil rights and the LGBTQ movements in the 60s and the 70s, we saw such a shift of LGBTQ visibility and events in history where people really stood up for their right to their sexuality, like the Stonewall riots in 1969. And many people still engaged in lavender marriages due to social and professional pressures, but others actually started to live more openly, more freely, and just began to really claim who they are publicly. The world of politics remained a stronghold for lavender marriages well into the 20th century, and many politicians entered strategic marriages to avoid controversy, to avoid slander on their name and on the things that they were trying to do and the political changes they were trying to make. There have been numerous rumors and allegations about many political figures and their potential lavender marriages throughout the term of history, though very few of them have been definitively confirmed. Again, though, that's the point. The point is for protection and to, hide that part of your identity. And so if we could all just figure it out and it was all confirmed, it would kind of defeat the purpose. But it definitely comes with a benefit when you're in a position where there is potentially room for blackmail, there is potentially room for slander, there is potentially room for defamation or a loss caused by that. And in the 80s, there was a major AIDS epidemic. This really started to expose the hidden LGBTQ community in Hollywood and beyond, as many men who had previously remained closeted were forced to confront their identities in public due to the AIDS epidemic and due to, sometimes ending up positive or, just have being exposed. And as societal attitudes shifted, many individuals who had been in lavender marriages began to speak more openly about their experiences due to this shift in this time frame and the change that we have seen towards the LGBTQ community over such a period of time. Ultimately, lavender marriages at their core throughout history were a survival strategy in a world that did not allow LGBTQ people to live authentically. From Hollywood's golden age to political circles and beyond, these marriages served as a shield against discrimination, legal repercussions, and even ultimately career destruction. While the need for them has lessened over the years, in many parts of the world or in many careers, in many, just different circles, their history is a powerful reminder of how deeply ingrained societal norms can force people to conceal who they truly are and to prevent them from being themselves. So let's fast forward a bit. By the mid to late 20th century, things really were starting to shift. The world was changing, civil rights movements were gaining momentum, and the fight for equality wasn't just about race or gender anymore. The Stonewall riots in 1969 are often considered the spark that really ignited the modern LGBTQ rights movement, and they sent a clear message. People were done hiding, done pretending, and done letting society dictate who they could love and how they could live. But here's the thing. Just because a movement was growing didn't mean that the world had changed or progressed completely overnight. Far from it. The backlash was real, and the fear of being outed was still a very real and very dangerous thing that people feared. Lavender marriages didn't just disappear because people were fighting for their rights. In some ways, they became even more crucial, especially for people who had a lot to lose, like public figures, teachers, politicians, and even everyday people who simply wanted to keep their jobs and protect their families. The 1970s brought more visibility, more activism, and for some, more hope. But it also brought resistance, and homophobia was still deeply embedded in society. For many people, coming out wasn't even an option because of this. Some people entered into lavender marriages as a way to maintain their personal and professional security. Others did it because they genuinely wanted families. They wanted children, and they wanted a sense of normalcy, even if their love life looked different behind closed doors. They were okay with that. And in many cases, their spouses were okay with that. And then came the 1980s, and this decade is really one that changed everything in ways that no one could have predicted. The AIDS crisis hit hard. It was devastating to the LGBTQ community, and it fueled a new wave of fear and discrimination. People were losing their jobs, their homes, their families, sometimes just for being suspected of being gay. The media sensationalized it, calling it the gay plague, and the government, of course, did very little to help. And for some, a lavender marriage became not just a shield, but a lifeline that they were holding on to. It was a way to ensure that if something happened, they wouldn't be left alone. A way to make sure they had access to medical care, legal protections, financial security. It wasn't just about keeping up appearances. It was truly about survival. And then in the 1990s, it really brought an undeniable shift in culture, even though it was a slow shift. And we see a different sort of representation for the LGBTQ community start to really take shape in media in a way that it had never been seen before. Shows like Ellen and Will and Grace brought queer characters into living rooms across America, making conversations about sexuality harder to ignore and dismiss. At the same time, the fight for marriage equality was heating up, forcing the world to really examine what love and commitment truly meant. But again, lavender marriages did not vanish overnight. Even in this era of growing representation, there were still deep-rooted reasons people felt they had to conform. Elton John, for example, I cannot pronounce his wife's name or ex-wife's name, but in the 80s, he married his close friend, and she was his sound engineer. And then 3 years later, he came out publicly. And his story wasn't unique. Many in the public eye still felt the pressure to marry into a heterosexual marriage, even as the world was slowly becoming more accepting. As the early 2000s rolled in, society's understanding of relationships began to expand. And it wasn't just about whether someone was in a same-sex or opposite-sex relationship anymore. People were starting to really rethink the entire institution of marriage itself. And what was it really about? Was it about love? Was it about companionship? Was it more for stability? Was it about everything? Was it necessary at all? Today, we see an entirely new perspective on relationships. People are questioning traditional structures. They're redefining what partnership means. Some prioritize emotional companionship over romance. Others form lifelong partnerships that don't necessarily fit into the mold of what we normally see as a marriage. And while lavender marriage may no longer be as common in countries with legal protections for LGBTQ individuals, they still exist in so many places where being openly gay is dangerous or illegal, or even could have a price that you're not willing to pay, such as your career or your reputation. Even now, some people still choose to enter into lavender marriages or marriages of convenience for different reasons. Maybe it's to maintain family ties, maybe it's a financial decision, and some just simply prefer it because they prefer a different type of partnership than what society expects for marriage to be and for marriages to conform to. The world has come an entirely long way, but the history of lavender marriages is more than just a relic of the past. It's a testament to the resilience of those who had to navigate a world that wasn't necessarily built for them. A reminder that for so many, survival meant making impossible choices. It meant sacrificing your happiness in different ways or finding different ways to even be able to enjoy that happiness. And an acknowledgement that even now, there are still places where those choices really are not choices or options on the table at all. So here's the big question. Do lavender marriages still exist? It's 2025, but the answer is absolutely. Like everything else, they have evolved. They look different, and the reasons behind them may look different from the reasons that lavender marriages actually became a thing. But the way that they function, the reasons behind them, and even the labels we use to describe them does not change the fact that they do exist in many different ways. Today, many people can live openly as their authentic selves in ways that previous generations could not have ever imagined, truly. You know, we have different legal protections, we have different societal progress, and increased visibility has made coming out a much safer option, at least in certain parts of the world. But that doesn't mean the pressures that created lavender marriages have completely just disappeared. In fact, they've just really taken on new forms. So let's talk about cultural and family expectations. In many communities, whether it's due to religion, due to tradition, or due to the societal norms in those communities, being openly LGBTQ is still seen as unacceptable. And in these cases, marriage isn't just a personal choice, it's an expectation, a duty. Sometimes it's even a necessity for maintaining ties to one's family or keeping your family in the society that you are in. For example, in some conservative religious communities, like certain sects of Christianity, Islam, or Orthodox Judaism, marriage is deeply tied to faith and social standing. Coming out could mean losing your family, losing financial security, or even being physically unsafe in communities where this is predominantly frowned upon. In these cases, some individuals still enter into lavender marriages to maintain their place in their community. And it's not always just about religion. Cultural traditions also play a huge role. In some parts of the world, especially in parts of South Asia, Middle Eastern, or East Asian cultures, arranged marriages remain common. And coming out as LGBTQ could bring immense shame to one's family. Some people in these situations chose to enter a marriage of convenience, sometimes with another LGBTQ individual who is facing the same pressures. So they understand and they get it and they become friends and they truly do have a relationship, but it's not of what is societally normal in these communities. And these arrangements allow them to fulfill their family's expectations while still having the freedom to pursue their true identities in private. Then there's the professional aspect. Even in industries where LGBTQ rights are legally protected, discrimination, whether it's overt or subtle, still exists. In certain careers, maintaining a traditional image can impact job security, especially if you are required to have a family image and you're not portraying a family oriented individual. Business success can be impacted by this, and even your public perception within your company or your peers. This is especially true in politics, corporate leadership, and high-profile entertainment roles where public opinion really can make or break a career. Now, beyond the traditional lavender marriages of the past, we're also seeing new kinds of intentional partnerships that challenge how we define relationships. One of the most significant is a queerplatonic relationship. A queerplatonic relationship, or QPR, is a committed partnership between two people that aren't necessarily based on romance or sexual attraction, but instead on a deep emotional connection. They have shared goals, they want lifelong companionship, and for some LGBTQ individuals, this can be an alternative to traditional dating or marriage and create a life where someone they deeply trust and care for is by their side without the pressure of fitting into the heteronormative expectations of what love and marriage should look like and should be. And some of these relationships actually evolved from lavender marriages. A couple that originally married due to the external pressures might over time come to genuinely love and support each other as life partners in a non-romantic way. For example, some older couples who have entered lavender marriages in the 60s or 70s have chosen to stay together as best friends, raising their children and growing old together, and serving as each other's family in a world that once forced them into secrecy. And then there's bearding. And this is a term that you may have heard, especially in relation to Hollywood and in entertainment and high-profile industries. There's still an immense pressure to maintain certain images, and coming out can really truly give people backlash that they don't want to deal with. And we've seen it time and time again. We've seen society tear people apart online and in the media just due to simple decisions that people make every single day, but for them it is not normal or approved for them to talk in such a way or act in such a way or have an image that portrays such a manner. So there's still this immense pressure to maintain images, and a beard is someone who usually is a woman but who dates or marries a man. It can be vice versa, but usually it is typically a woman, to provide a heteronormative cover for someone who doesn't want to or can't publicly disclose their sexuality. Rumors of bearding relationships have swirled around celebrities for decades, though unless someone speaks out, of course, we won't know for sure, and realistically, it's not our business. In the golden age of Hollywood, it was an open secret that actors like Rock Hudson, Tab Hunter, and even some of the biggest female stars of that time had carefully arranged relationships to maintain their public personas. Today, those rumors haven't stopped. Every few years, speculation arises around major celebrities whose relationships seem more about optics than romance. Of course, not every public relationship is a lavender marriage or a bearding situation, but the fact that these suspicions still exist shows that the pressures of conformity aren't entirely behind us. Even at a time where LGBTQ visibility is higher than ever, some people, especially in industries that rely on mass appeal and image, really feel like they still have something to lose by living openly. So, at the end of the day, what does this tell us? It tells us that while society has made progress, we still have a long way to really go. The need for lavender marriages may have diminished significantly in certain places, but for many people, there's still a reality and there's still a need to survive within their cultures, their families, or their professions. And more importantly, I think it reminds us that relationships don't have to fit one rigid mold. People build their lives together in ways that make sense for them, and that's okay. Whether it's a lavender marriage, a queer platonic partnership, or any other kind of chosen relationship, the core idea remains the same: human connection, support, and the desire to navigate the world with someone who understands you. At the end of the day, these relationships aren't about being deceptive or living a lie. They're about survival. They're about making choices in a world that still doesn't make space for everyone. And as a society, and as we continue to evolve, hopefully we will reach a point where no one feels they need to hide being gay or being a lesbian in the first place. But we're not there yet. And as time goes by, we can only strive to be more kind and more accepting and less discriminatory when it comes to people's sexuality as far as being in the LGBTQ community. This has been such an eye-opening conversation. This has been really informative, and it really goes to show how much relationships are shaped by culture and history and personal choice, as well as discrimination and judgment on from the people that we love and the people that we see as our peers and that we rely on to sign our paychecks even. I would love to hear from you, our listeners. Have you or someone you know experienced a lavender marriage or a queer platonic partnership? Or do you have thoughts on how relationships are evolving today? Send me a message or drop a comment, and I will see you guys later. Thank you so much for tuning in to In Your 30s. Do not forget to subscribe, 5-star rate, and review, and I will see you next time. Bye.